Now, Jim Swire is indeed a very fine and noble Christian gentleman, and he speaks for families, I don't know if it's all the families, but families of the British victims of the Lockerbie bombing, who are examining plans to force a public inquiry under human rights laws. Jim says they would prefer a commission established by Scottish ministers or an inquiry led by the United Nations. He says we've taken initial advice, but forcing an inquiry would be our last option. Dr. Swire, whose daughter Flora was among the people who died when Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie in 1988, said he was glad al-Megrahi had been released, but disappointed that the appeal against this conviction was not going ahead. He's also considering action against the Scottish Prosecution Service, because he's convinced it deliberately blocked attempts to bring his daughter's real killers to court. He believes that the most likely group to have carried out the bombing was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. At the time, the group was headed by Ahmed Jibril, a former Syrian army captain who was based in Damascus and funded by Iran. Dr. Wire suspects Iran was seeking revenge for the shooting down of Iranian Flight 655 with the loss of 290 lives by the USS Vincennes in July 1988, just 5 months before Lockerbie. Iran did not accept the US's claim that the incident with the Iranian flight was a mistake. Dr. Swire believes the families of the victims have been pawns in a political scenario that had nothing to do with the truth. And he added, I am a Christian, so I would hope that, even if I was convinced that Megrahi was guilty, my Christian compassion and forgiveness would extend to wanting to see him die with his family around him in Libya. But I believe he is innocent. Me too, and I'm proud to talk to Dr. Jim Swire on the show tonight. Dr. Swire, thanks a lot for joining us.
You're very well informed, George. My goodness.
Well, I followed this case right from the very beginning. And I arrived at your conclusion a very long time ago, and I know a thing or two about events in that region,
yes.
And especially events in the Palestinian diaspora, and especially matters concerning Mr. Ahmed Jibril. So I was never in any doubt that Libya was framed and that, therefore, Megrahi could not be guilty.
That's right, and actually it was Jibril's technology, when I heard it explained in court in Zeiss, that converted me from believing that, of course, these were the two men who must have murdered my daughter, to believing that they had nothing to do with it.
Well, that's very interesting that you have been able to let the facts alter your opinions.
Well, I'm not alone in that, of course. Most people who've studied closely what's going on, in that, particularly since that trial, during that trial, have come to the same conclusion. I mean, the UN appointed an international observer called Professor Hans Köchler, and he has said that the verdict was a travesty of justice, should never have been brought in. And furthermore, he has actually said, and this is a big challenge, or should be, to Alex Salmond and Karen Scotland, I think, he said that the explanation for the achievement of this perverse verdict is deliberate malpractice on the part of the Crown Office. Now, that's a pretty extraordinary statement for a UN-appointed observer to make against the legal system of another country, isn't it?
And yes, and it's a big challenge, as you say, to the Scottish Government, whether they're going to follow this through. What's your feeling about that? Is the Scottish... I saw you in the gallery the other day at the debate in the Parliament at Holyrood. What's your feeling? Have the SNP done and gone as far as they're likely to, or are they likely to want vindication by opening such an inquiry?
I'll tell you what my feelings were in the Parliament, and that was that there was an enormous great elephant on the floor of the debating chamber that everybody was ignoring, and they were all going on about, well, largely scoring points off each other in a party sort of way, which is pretty petty when you think of the enormity of Lockerbie. But what they were all ignoring, they were all talking about should he or shouldn't he have been sent home in this, that, or the other way. And all the time, nobody except two MSPs.
Well, there was the SNP woman. She's challenging the...
Christine Graham.
She's done very well, I must say.
Pardon?
She's done very well, I think.
Very well indeed. That's Christine Graham. And there was also a Conservative MSP called Brocklebank, I think.
Yes, Ted Brocklebank. He's a newsman, of course. He's a journalist by trade.
Yeah.
So, ferreting out the truth is second nature to him.
That's right, and he said it would have been, was the effective, it would have been a terrible thing to keep this man in prison till he died, particularly as he might be an innocent man. And, of course, Scotland's own Criminal Case Review Commission has said that it may have been a miscarriage of justice. So there's a lot of questions left unanswered. And perhaps one of them that's worth asking about the questions surrounding his release is why he withdrew his second appeal, which we hoped would get us much closer to the truth. And, of course, everyone's denying that anyone put any pressure on him to do that. But he didn't have to do it, you know, to go home. He could have let it run.
Do you think he properly understood that?
Well, I'm not sure at all. It sounds as though it was discussed with him the relationship between something called prisoner transfer agreement and compassionate release. And, of course, prisoner transfer agreement did require him to withdraw his appeal. But compassionate release did not, and maybe there was spillover. I mean, when I met him and talked to him, he was always determined to clear his name before he went home to Libya. But, of course, with the shadow of death hanging so heavily over him, he might well have spontaneously changed his mind. But there are deep suspicions that somebody gave him a little shove to make him withdraw the appeal. And it's very clear that the Crown Office did not wish that appeal to continue. I mean, their foot-dragging exercises in the appeal court in Edinburgh had to be seen to be believed. It was a gross travesty of how an appeal ought to be heard. The man had already done 8 years in prison, and his appeal was only just getting going.
Yes. Now, of course, that's water under the bridge, but we could still push for a public inquiry, and that's what you're doing. Tell us about that.
Well, there are various forms of inquiry, and I have actually had a meeting with Alex Salmond a couple of days ago, which I thought it was supposed to be kept hush-hush, but he's mentioned it in public, so I can mention it too. And basically, Alex Salmond, of course, he was saying that he believes that the verdict is correct. But there are so many people now who don't believe that. I think people are beginning to get a little more cagey about saying that because they're beginning to realize the thing is going to fall flat on its face before very much longer. And he mentioned the question of the fragment of circuit board from a digital timer, which was supposed to have been found at the site. And he made something of the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission not having found any evidence that was fraudulently introduced. But there are so many aspects known to me about that particular fragment, which incidentally was the only piece of physical evidence purportedly supporting the extraordinary prosecution story that the bomb was brought through security in Lucca Airport, Malta by McGrahy and flown via Frankfurt and another change of aircraft at Heathrow onto the fatal flight. It really was a most extraordinarily unlikely story.
Indeed. Now, if we get any kind of inquiry, the truth, of course, will out, which is a good reason for the powerful in the land to block it. How would you calibrate the chances of getting some kind of public inquiry? Can you use the human rights laws, the European laws that exist?
I believe that we could, if necessary, use the human rights laws. There are other alternatives. A Scottish launched inquiry would have to be pretty high-powered. It would have to have the ability to make people give evidence under oath on penalty of punishment if they lied. And that is something that's very difficult to achieve unless it comes from the very top in Scotland. It's very difficult to see how it could work. But there's also been suggestions that we might take the matter to the United Nations. And this is where actually there's always, even in the most grim situation, there's always a bit of humour tucked away somewhere, isn't there? And if you look at the Security Council of the United Nations, if we tried to get them to launch an inquiry, presumably Britain and America would veto it. But it would be very interesting. Perhaps France and France actually really might not veto it because France has sorted out another aviation disaster which was caused by Libya, unlike Lockerbie being caused by McGrahy. And so they have a track record for getting to the truth of aviation disasters. Maybe they would not veto it. And if any country such as China or France didn't veto it, that would tell the world something, wouldn't it?
Indeed. Imagine...
the alternative is a funny bit. Sorry, I mentioned a bit of humour. That is, if we took it to the General Assembly, in 2 weeks' time, you know who's going to be President of the General Assembly?
Is it Libya?
Yes.
Well,
anyway,
indeed.
Who knows?
Dr. James Swire, thank you very much indeed, and the very best of luck with your efforts to get to the truth. Imagine a United Nations veto by Britain and the United States against a public inquiry to prove the truth about the great crime that took place in 1988, in which Dr. Swire lost his daughter